Hello.
Hello,
Uh, Say something about yourself.
my name is John Lang. I live with my wife here in eastern North Carolina, and I'm here to answer some questions.
So, other day I was in a place where I have seen police were getting ready with barricades and all that. It was Friday afternoon, and I've seen some students. They were starting to come over there very nicely. They were wearing the mask and they had some banners in their hands and all that. And as an educator and as a person who thinks, who ponders, I had a lot of thoughts going in my head. I want to ask you, had you been there in my place, what would be going on in your head?
I'm always interested in what people are protesting, and it is um, my opinion that it is not only the right of people in this country to protest, it is the duty of the people in this country to protest, particularly young people, to give voice to their dissent, to give voice to their grievances, and to um, make their voices known in a peaceful but loud way, so that they are being paid attention to. It is important that we pay attention to those people, young and old, but particularly the young people, um, to what they have to say and to what their objections to um, the current issues or the current problems are.
So here's my question. I was doing some research and I saw there was an article and it talks about some instruments of state violence. It says police, prisons, army, and there can be some other instruments who could be actually for state violence. Do you want to question the existence of instruments of police violence or state violence? Or do you think there is any such thing, or you deny that, or do you think there is a gray area?
All force is violence. All authority is based on violence, based on force. The police are a necessary um, arm of the government, and our government is a arm of the people themselves. For the police to think of themselves as independent and autonomous is not right. They have a very specific role to keep the peace and to make sure that there is that the violence that other people do is controlled and limited to what they're allowed to do by law. The police are here to enforce the law, and the police sometimes have to use violence and force to do that. But they should do so impassionately. They should do so judiciously, and their training should back up their their actions and their
What about army? What about prisons?
army. I don't believe that the army has a legitimate place of controlling the population within the United States unless there is a armed insurrection that calls for the military to take a hand in something. If the police cannot control a certain force within the United States, within the country, and it is armed and the army is the only way to do it, then there may be a legitimate reason for that.
Do you think
But it is not the national military that should take it in hand. It is the National Guard.
do you think we are definitely looking for some prison reforms? And what do you see? Is there a connection between the movement BLM going on at this moment and poverty?
I think there's always a connection between the, an organization and a movement like Black Lives Matter and poverty. But I think that the name Black Lives Matter is just a little bit wrong. I think that BLM should stand for Black Life Matters. blacks and whites and all people within this country should have the same opportunities and should have the same access to improving their lives and to themselves um, making their lives worthwhile. And we do that through education, and we do that uh, through opportunities. I think that the black population in this country is a community that is and has been always one at a very significant disadvantage, and it's not fair that they are. The way to change that is through the protests that we see now, and but particularly through the structure of our country and how education and and opportunity are presented to the black community so that they can achieve the goals that they're after on an individual basis and as a community itself.
So here's my question. On personal level, are you afraid of revolutionary demands and antagonistic actions as you see lately going on in our country?
No, revolution is always a good thing. The Thomas Jefferson said that the revolution, the tree of liberty, should always be um, fed by the blood of revolutionaries, and it was true then, and it is true now. The revolution is a motive, a method of change. Controlling the violence within the revolution is the function of the police, and they should control that violence as much as possible. But they should do so in a way that is not arbitrary and is not uh, focused on one particular group or another. It should be focused on those who break the laws that are set within the country.
So you are trying to say the protests which turned violent time to time, and there had been some elements who are not very informed, and they have not done their homework, even if their own life is their homework, their own heritage, their own race, as they say in a very broad perspective. Do you think it's wrong when you say property damage or not having the connection with what's going on and not having the proper knowledge of history, you're not making the right connection and thus you're not making the right choices? What do you have to say about
There's
that?
always a mentality to a mob that tends to overreact and become violent if it's not controlled in one way or another. It is the responsibility of those people who initiate the protests to set out the goals of those protests very specifically. If there are no goals, if it's just an emotional reaction, then the mob is going to act emotionally, and violence is good, and property destruction and that kind of thing is going to result. The uh, the leadership of this country should be leaders to those people who do the protests just as much as the people who don't. And defending the status quo is not the function of the government. The function of the government is to ensure that the voice of the American people is heard, um, both radicals and conservative.
Do you know about Bugalov movement and what do you have to say about Antifa?
I'm sorry, the what movement?
Boogaloo, Boogalloo movement, and Antifa.
I don't know about the Boogaloo movement. No.
Okay, what do you have to say about Antifa?
Antifa, in my opinion, is a result of very, very powerful people controlling a segment of the population that is willing to use violence in order to effect change. The Antifa is using young people who are in themselves, I believe, most people in Antifa are privileged and are after very sketchy goals in and of themselves. There are as many goals within Antifa as there are people within Antifa, and that's not a legitimate protest. But I believe that the group itself is being controlled by people who simply want to disrupt the current power structure within this country.
Thank you, Mr. Lang, and I would be continuing the dialogue because I still have a lot more questions to ask and many more things to learn as you have been born and raised here, and you said your ancestors came to this country in 1600. So definitely your perspective is different than mine, and I would like to ask you some more questions in next dialogue continues. Thank you very much.